Who's father of baby? Claire decides to tell the whole truth. Will Victoria lose it? On a stormy autumn in Genoa City, the verity that had been circling for months eventually began to close in on the Newman family, hanging to explode everything they allowed. They understood about fidelity, heritage, and love. On the young and the restless, secrets infrequently stay buried for long, but this bone had the power to shake the Newman dynasty to its core. Claire had spent weeks pacing the marble bottoms of the Newman estate, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach, her mind replaying every decision that had led her then. The whispers had formally started. Staff at Newman Enterprises changed ganders when she entered a room. The press had caught wind that commodity was out. And at the center of it all was a single, ruinous question: who's the father of Claire's baby? Claire knew that formally she spoke the name out loud, there would be no turning back. For a time, she had induced herself she could cover everyone by staying silent. She told herself the verity would only beget pain. But the weight of the taradiddle, or rather, the elision, was crushing her. She allowed. About Victoria, about the complicated, fragile bond they had erected. She allowed. About how hard she had fought to be accepted as part of this family. And she knew that when the verity came out, Victoria might no way forgive her. Victoria had always flattered herself on being suitable to read people. As a leading force at Newman Enterprises and the fiercely defensive son of Victor Newman, she had erected her life on instinct and strategy. Recently, however, her instincts had been screaming at her that commodity wasn't right. Claire's unforeseen mood swings, her evasiveness, the way she avoided certain exchanges, none of it felt arbitrary. Victoria had brazened her gently at first, offering support, reminding her that family stands together. But Claire had veered, averring there was nothing to worry about. The breaking point came during a tense regale at the estate. Nikki watched precisely as Claire pushed food around her plate, slightly eating. Victor, ever observant, noticed too, though he said nothing. It was Victoria who eventually snapped, her tolerance worn thin. She demanded to know what Claire was hiding. The room fell silent, the clink of flatware echoing like a projectile. Claire's eyes filled with gashes, and for a moment, it looked as though she might formally again retreat into silence. But commodity shifted in her expression. A resoluteness hardened there. She stood up, her voice pulsing but determined. She told them she was pregnant. The words sounded to hang in the air, suspended between shock and unbelief. Nikki heaved vocally. Victor's expression went undecipherable, his mind formally calculating the counter-accusations. But it was Victoria who replied most explosively. She stood as well, her president scraping loudly against the bottom, demanding to know who the father was. Claire did it. That vacillation was all Victoria demanded to smell peril. The rumors had linked Claire to more than one man in recent months. There had been whispers of a revivified connection with Kyle, a late-night meeting that had set speeches wagging. There had also been enterprise about a deeper bond with Holden, whose unforeseen reappearance in Genoa City had caused its own surge of conspiracy. Claire knew that any name she said would enkindle a disagreement. But only one of those names was true. She took a breath and admitted that the father was someone Victoria would no way anticipate and maybe no way accept. The concession that followed transferred shockwaves through the Newman menage. Claire revealed that the father of her baby wasn't the man everyone suspected. It wasn't Kyle. It wasn't Holden. It was someone whose involvement would complicate business alliances and particular commitment likewise. The details of their connection revealed out in halting fractions a moment of vulnerability, participated pain, a night when both of them believed they were alone in the world. Victoria's face drained of color as the verity unfolded. She felt blindsided, betrayed not just by Claire but by the man involved. How could this have happened under her watch? How could someone so near to her make such a life-altering decision without considering the fallout? Victor's response was colder, more controlled. He asked pointed questions, his tone calm but edged with sword. He wanted to know whether the father intended to step up. He wanted to know whether this gestation could be used against the family. He wanted to know how this would affect Newman Enterprises. To Victor, particular matters were always intertwined with power. Claire claimed that she hadn't planned any of it. She admitted she had been hysterical of Victoria's response, hysterical of disappointing everyone, hysterical of losing her place in the family. But she also made it clear that she'd not be shamed of her child. Whatever miscalculations she had made, she'd enjoy them. Victoria's wrathfulness boiled over. She indicted Claire of recklessness, of risking everything they had worked to make. Old injuries resurfaced, allegations about fidelity, about trust, about who truly belonged in the Newman inner circle. Claire tried to defend herself, pointing out that she had been trying to cover Victoria from pain. But Victoria shot back that the taradiddle had caused more damage than the Verity ever could. Nikki tried to intervene, reminding them both that family shouldn't turn on each other in a moment of extremity. She spoke vocally about remission, about the miscalculations she herself had made in her youth. But Victoria wasn't ready to hear it. For her, this wasn't just about a baby. It was about control slipping through her fritters. Meanwhile, outside the estate, the man at the center of the storm scuffled with his own fears. When he learned that Claire had decided to tell the Verity, his first response was fear. He knew what it would mean for his career, for his connections, for his standing in Genoa City. Yet beneath the anxiety was commodity additional, an unanticipated swell of protectiveness. He watched about Claire more than he'd allowed himself to admit. And the idea of his child changed everything. When he arrived at the estate to face the music, the pressure was palpable. Victor regarded him with icy scrutiny. Victoria's eyes burned with an admixture of fury and unbelief. Claire stood her ground, refusing to let anyone speak for her. She verified that this man was indeed the father and that she intended to raise the baby with or without the family's blessing. The battle that followed was explosive. Allegations flew. Victor advised the man that if he hurt Claire, there would be consequences. Victoria demanded to know whether this had been a calculated move. Claire claimed it had been about passions, not strategy. In the days that followed, Genoa City buzzed with enterprise. News travels presto in a city like this, especially when it involves the Newmans. Business rivals watched nearly, wondering whether the reproach would weaken Victoria's position. Musketeers chose sides. Some rallied around Claire, esteeming her courage. Others rumored that she had been reckless. Victoria retreated into work, throwing herself into meetings and accessions as a way to avoid defying her feelings. But late at night, alone in her office, she couldn't escape the pang of treason. She loved Claire. That was what made this hurt so deeply. She felt as though she had been cut out of a decision that would alter the family ever. Claire, for her part, endured a strange sense of relief. The Verity was out. The secret no longer rotted inside her. She began to concentrate on the unborn, Croker's movables, nursery plans, delicate exchanges about co-parenting. She hoped that, in time, Victoria would come around. Victor remained a brewing presence, watching, assessing. He'd seen innumerous Dishonest hang his conglomerate, and he knew that survival depended on consanity. Whether he liked it or not, this child would be a Newman by blood or by association. And that meant guarding the family name at all costs. As pressures coddled, a fragile armistice began to form. Victoria, after days of silence, eventually approached Claire. The discussion was raw and painful, filled with gashes and raised voices. But beneath the wrathfulness was love. Victoria admitted that her fear had fueled her rage. She didn't want Claire to suffer. She didn't want history to repeat itself. Claire apologized for keeping the secret but stood establishment in her decision to move forward. She asked Victoria not for blessing, but for support. It was a turning point. Victoria didn't promise remission overnight, but she did promise to try. In classic The Young and the Restless fashion, the disclosure set the stage for indeed further drama. Business alliances would shift. Romantic connections would be tested. And the Newman family would formally again be forced to defy the Verity about themselves that power and love frequently collide in messy, changeable ways. The question of who the father was may have been answered, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Would Victoria truly accept this new reality? Would Victor use the situation to strain his grip on the family? And would Claire's decision to tell the whole Verity eventually bring mending, or tear the Newmans piecemeal for good? In Genoa City, nothing stays simple for long. And as Claire prepared to drink her child into a world defined by ambition and contest, she knew one thing for certain: the Verity had set her free, but it had also burned a fire that would burn for months to come. The fallout from Claire's concession didn't quiet down, it boosted. In true the young and the restless fashion, the disclosure about her baby's father was only the first earthquake before the earthquake. Genoa City thrived on secrets, but this one cut through the veritably center of the Newman heritage. The morning after the battle at the estate, Victoria arrived at Newman Enterprises earlier than usual. She didn't sleep the night ahead. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Claire standing there, chin lifted, recalcitrant yet alarmed, admitting the verity. The name of the father echoed in her mind like a taunt. It wasn't just about love. It wasn't indeed just about family. It was about power, control, trust. Victoria had spent her entire life fighting to prove herself good of the Newman name. She had endured backstabbings, commercial accomplishments, romantic disasters, and public demotion. But this felt different. This felt particular. When the father, determined now to step up, requested a meeting with her at Newman Enterprises, Victoria nearly refused. But Victor had tutored her commodity long ago. No way avoid a battlefield, however. She'd face it head-on, if there was going to be a war. He walked into her office with pressure written across his face. He wasn't trim. He wasn't defensive, however. He looked like a man who understood the magnitude of what he'd done, if anything. "I no way meant for this to helical," he said still. Victoria's laugh was sharp and earnest. "Helical? You suppose this is a PR problem? This is my family." He didn't blench. "It's my child too." That was the moment commodity shifted. The reality hit her with brutal clarity. No matter how angry she was, no matter how betrayed she felt, there was going to be a baby. An innocent life. And that baby tied him to the Newman dynasty ever. Meanwhile, Claire set up herself caught in a strange emotional limbo. The relief of telling the verity had snappily given way to anxiety about what came next. She knew the gossip had reached every corner of Genoa City. She saw the aesthetics when she walked into Crimson Lights. Exchanges broke. Heads turned. Sympathy mixed with judgment. She tried to concentrate on practical matters, Croker's visits, nutrition, planning, but her mind kept drifting back to Victoria. Their last discussion had ended in simulated civility. Victoria had promised to reuse. Claire understood that. But the distance between them felt unsupportable. One autumn, Nikki invited Claire over to the estate for tea. Unlike Victoria, Nikki's approach was gentle, nearly motherly. She didn't interrogate. She didn't charge. She asked Claire how she was feeling. Claire broke down. She admitted she had been scarified to speak up because she didn't want to be seen as manipulative. The father's position in the business world made everything look suspicious. Claire swore that the relationship hadn't started as strategy. It had been unanticipated, messy, emotional. Nikki heeded precisely. She had made her own share of complicated romantic opinions in her history. She knew what it meant to love someone who complicated the world around you. "Victoria will come around," Nikki said vocally. "But you have to give her space. She feels blindsided." Space. That was easier said than done. Back at Newman Enterprises, Victor was formally calculating the broader counter-accusations. He summoned the father for a private meeting. The atmosphere was icy. Victor's voice was calm, but the trouble beneath it was unmistakable. "If you suppose for one alternate that this child will be used as influence against my family, it won't," the man intruded forcefully. "I watch about Claire." Victor studied him for a long moment. He'd seen innumerous men claim fidelity to the Newman family only to deteriorate under pressure. But there was commodity bent in this one's eyes. Not fear. Determination. Victor didn't offer blessing. But he didn't offer destruction moreover. As weeks passed, Victoria's wrathfulness began to evolve into commodity more complicated. She noticed how the father attended movables with Claire. How he defended her when whispers grew louder. How he refused to let the gestation be framed as reproach. Victoria abominated that she admired it. Still, she couldn't shake the sting of treason. She brazened Claire again, this time in private. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Victoria demanded. Claire didn't dodge the question. "Because I knew you'd reply exactly like this." That's not fair. No, it's not fair. None of this is. The argument coddled but didn't explode. Rather, it revealed commodity deeper. Both women were hysterical. Victoria stressed losing control. Claire stressed losing love. Outside the Newman route, other players began circling. Rival directors suspected about insecurity at the top. Rumors suggested that Victoria's leadership might be compromised by particular drama. Anonymous tips reached tabloids intimating at maternity tests and boardroom secrets. When a journalist tried to ambush Claire outside her antenatal clinic, the father interposed, shielding her from invasive questions. The prince hit the internet within hours. The narrative shifted slightly, from reproach to solidarity. Victoria saw the filmland. And for the first time, her fury wasn't directed at them. It was directed at the predators trying to exploit the situation. That evening, she surprised everyone by holding a press conference. Standing behind the Newman Enterprises Tribune, she addressed the rumors directly. Our family is passing a particular matter, she said forcefully. But make no mistake, Newman Enterprises remains strong. We stand together. It wasn't an countersign. But it wasn't combination moreover. Claire watched the broadcast from home, gashes in her eyes. It wasn't remission, but it was protection. As the gestation progressed, subtle changes began to soften the hard edges of the conflict. Victoria attended one ultrasound appointment, originally out of obligation. But when she heard the faint, rapid-fire twinkle echo through the room, commodity inside her cracked open. That was her grandchild. Or bastard. Or some complicated combination that only the Newman family could produce. Titles didn't matter in that moment. Blood did. Victor, too, began shifting his station. He'd erected an conglomerate on heritage. And heritage needed heirs at law. He summoned legal counsels to still ensure the child's future was secured. Trust finances. Protections. Safeguards. Claire tasted the slow thaw. She didn't push. She didn't demand. She simply continued forward, honest, transparent, unwavering. The father proved himself in quieter ways. He declined openings that would take him down from Genoa City. He endured Victor's scrutiny without complaint. He stood beside Claire during every surge of mistrustfulness. One evening at the estate, Victoria set up Claire alone in the living room. The pressure between them had faded into commodity tender but fragile. I'm still angry, Victoria admitted. I know. But I don't want this baby growing up in a war zone. Claire's voice shook. Neither do I. Victoria reached out, reluctant at first, and placed her hand over Claire's stomach. The gesture was small, but monumental. We'll figure it out, Victoria said still. And for the first time since the verity came out, Claire believed her. Of course, this was Genoa City. Peace no way lasted ever. Just as stability sounded within reach, a new complication surfaced, whispers about a possible maternity challenge. Someone, maybe a jealous rival or a past former honey, suggested that the timeline didn't add up. The scuttlebutt hovered to undo everything. Claire was furious. She had told the verity. She had endured counterreaction. She wouldn't allow mistrustfulness to creep back in. Without vacillation, she agreed to a DNA test, not because she misdoubted the father, but because she refused to let anyone weaponize query. Victoria stood beside her during the appointment. The results, when they came, were definitive. No nebulosity. No twist. The father was exactly who Claire said he was. Victor reviewed the attestation tete-a-tete. Satisfied, he made it clear that any father attempts to question the child's legality would be met with consequences. The reproach began to lose broom. The gossip shifted away. But the emotional trip within the Newman family left endless marks. Claire grew stronger through the fire. She realized that telling the verity, indeed when it exploded her world, had been the only path forward. Secrets would have destroyed her from the inside out. Victoria learned that control wasn't the same as protection. Occasionally, love meant accepting issues you didn't script. Victor reaffirmed his belief that family consanity was both armament and guard. And the father? He stepped into a new identity, not just as a businessman or rival, but as a parent. As Claire entered her final trimester, The atmosphere at the estate converted. Nikki began stitching Bitsy robes. Victoria